As part of the offer that we have through our newly created Downtown Den, DIB is going to start to host a series of live events. First of those events was with the leader of Manchester City Council, Sir Richard Leese. Sir Richard spoke about a whole diverse range of issues, including the construction sector, digital sector, the hospitality and visitor economy, and climate change. As ever, he was open and very transparent in terms of the information that he was able to give to those who attended. And first of all, I asked him how Manchester City Council had responded to this unprecedented crisis.
We have to be honest that the world wasn't ready for this crisis, never mind the country, and we are playing catch up, I think. I think nationally that we've been slow to learn the lessons from other places, and so we are grappling with, as a result, with some real issues locally. I've just come off a health call that we clearly aren't testing enough people. We don't have enough PPE equipment in hospitals, never mind for primary care and so on. But working with all of that, we've clearly managed to clear a lot of space in our hospitals ready for the rush that's going to take place. We've put arrangements in place in order to be able to provide support for vulnerable people, not just the people on the government's shielded list. We're going through with voluntary organisations, with the GPs, with others, to make sure that as far as possible, anybody is a vulnerable person, is a shielded person, maybe is self-isolating but has no family or friends to be able to support them, that we're able to support as many people as possible. So all of that is going on, and I think organisationally that Greater Manchester is in a fairly good place to deal with that. Obviously, we have some pretty basic services to maintain. So probably one of the most basic, and it's pretty health related as well, is emptying bins. Actually, in general, with public service workers, we're in the region of 15 to 20% people down across the board. That is a mixture of people who are self-isolating because they're vulnerable, or they have got symptoms, and that's pretty common across the entirety of, whether it's refuse collection or police. It's pretty much the same sort of figures, really. That means we can't do everything that we would have done previously. In Manchester, we are keeping all the basic collections going. It's actually green bins that we simply cannot deliver, but the rest of the service we can deliver. So again, those key basic services we are able to keep going. In terms of what we're doing with the economy, that's although there is work at a local level, it's being led by the Growth Company on behalf of Greater Manchester. Clearly what they've been doing first and foremost is to put a lot in place in terms of guidance and advice about how business can start to benefit from the things that government has put in place so far, to be able to go back and try and give messages to government about where what's in place really doesn't do the job. Clearly, over the past week or so, there was a big discussion with government about people having to give personal guarantees for the loan scheme, which government's moved on, which is good news that they have moved on that. Still finding that I'm talking to regional directors, etc., at banks about loans still not, the money not flowing basically into businesses. We know that's a big issue. We also know that for companies that reduce working hours for employees, they get no support, whereas if they lay them off completely, they do get support. And so that's having those sorts of discussions with government, but trying to make sure that we do maximise the support that is available to business. I think we've just reached a point now, not that all of that is in place, because it clearly isn't, and we know that for a lot of businesses, if they don't get some cash into them before the end of this month, that an awful lot are going to be in very serious cash flow problems. So whilst we know there is a lot to be done to make sure that what is in place works, we are now beginning to start looking, well, what happens when we get to the end of this? How do we make sure that we are in the right space to be able to drive a recovery? Probably I mean, that's a very whistle-stop summary of where we're up to, really. But there are work streams both about resilience of business, but now we will be, over the next couple of weeks, developing that recovery work stream as well.
And you mentioned there a number of initiatives that have been introduced by the government, Richard, and I think, largely speaking, they've been welcomed initiatives, but the delivery perhaps hasn't been as well prepared as it may have been, and therefore, as you've rightly said, the banks haven't stepped up to the mark as yet. Hopefully that will change over the next week or so. I think there were some gaps in terms of initial announcements. The furloughing situation seems a bit bizarre to me. So, you've either got to lay people off entirely, you can't give them any part-time work. That causes and creates potential difficulties going forward, not least mental health problems to be. And then, of course, with the hospitality sector, the advice that we've been given is that hospitality companies need to approach local authorities or wait to be approached by the local authority before they get this grant. How are you finding being able to manage that? Because, as you've rightly said, you're already down on resource. So where are you finding the time and the personnel to deliver that part of the package?
Well, I think a couple of things for that is that there are clearly things that we aren't doing. So, for example, we're not operating leisure centres anymore. So we are redeploying staff into other areas of activity. And hardship, both for individuals and businesses, clearly a priority area for us. So our revenues and benefits part of the organisation is we are putting extra support into that. In terms of getting grants to business, for most of them, we can do it basically off our business rate register. We know who's eligible from that. There are gaps in that, though, because there are quite a lot of small businesses that would otherwise be eligible that are in premises where they basically pay their rates through their rent rather than direct to the council. So there are some gaps we're having to fill there. And of course, the council, all councils have got their own cash flow problems as a result of this as well. And that was something we were having to cash flow because we haven't got the money from government either.
How do you feel the government generally have handled the crisis?
I don't want to be particularly critical around this because this is not the time for politics, really. But I guess what I'd say to people, go and look at the front pages of pretty much every national newspaper at the moment. And I think today or yesterday it's been all about testing. We're not testing enough. That the evidence from elsewhere is that testing is the absolute key to getting this thing under control, not only quickly, but for the long term as well. So we're not doing that. I don't think generally speaking, that even the measures to support business have always been, I think, a little bit behind the curve rather than looking at what's happened elsewhere and getting it ahead of the curve. Having said that, let's be honest about this, is that none of us anticipated the seriousness of what's now happening. And we have, and this will be true across the country, that through our local resilience forum is that we had a pandemic plan. The pandemic plan didn't match the pandemic we've got. We just have to be honest about those things. So it's very easy to start throwing dirt around, but we're all dealing with something that's beyond our experience.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair comment, Rich. I think the other thing to say, though, is that you've sort of referenced this in your earlier comments. If we've been behind the curve in terms of handling the crisis, it's important that we try and get ahead of the game now. And therefore, when we do return to some form of normality, we need to be in a position where businesses and the economy can start to grow as quickly as it possibly can again. Are there any particular initiatives, measures that are being taken place to help with that through the growth platform, for example?
Oh, well, I just said, but we're starting to do that now. We're starting to look at and develop an economy recovery group that will start looking at the measures we need to have in place. And sad to say that this is not something that we're going to be needing next week, because this is we're going to have a few months of this, I think, before we're in a position to start really getting recovery going. And that's going to be hard. We are going to, inevitably, we are going to lose businesses out of this, because that's what happens when we're in these circumstances. I'm not going to go through it, but we've got a range of survey evidence that the chambers of commerce have done nationally, stuff that the growth company has done locally, and it all makes very, very gloomy reading. But if you want to sum it up, the fact that the latest universal credit application figures are 5 times what you would normally expect really says everything you need to know about what's happening within the economy at the moment. So this is going to be a long haul. You're right, though, that when we do get into that long haul, is that we do need to be as far as possible ahead of the curve rather than behind the curve. So have planned in advance about how we do try and take the economy forward and grow the economy. And I think part of that is, yes, businesses will survive. They will be in a position to grow. But inevitably, what always comes out of this is the opportunity for new business. And we really need to be in that space as well.
Yeah. And of course, last time we spoke, Richard, we were talking about, the dynamism of the city, led in many ways by construction, development, regeneration. I mean, the crane count was released by Deloitte recently, demonstrating once again Manchester's continued growth and momentum. And the construction sector, I guess, as is often the case, goes into recessions or into downturns first, but often can climb out of that very quickly as well. This is a slightly different situation to what we experienced in 2008. In fact, a very different situation. Would you have, therefore, some confidence that construction, as an example, as a sector, will be able to be supported and come through this relatively quickly?
Well, I think one of the things we've slowly done over the last couple of years is build up the skill base within the construction industry. There are still skill shortages, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was. And we know that there are still shortages because we've had above average inflation within the construction industries. But I think that does mean that we are in a position that when we do come out of this, clearly that there's got lots and lots of sites that either slowed down or have effectively stopped. But we'll be able to get underway very, very quickly. So yeah, we ought to be able to get some lead out of the construction industry.
And of course, the other sector that Manchester has massively built over the past 20 years now is its visitor economy, leisure, culture. All those facilities have been massively hit. So again, any special attention being paid to that sector?
Well, I think there are a couple of, let's talk about a few sectors, and probably the biggest growth area we've seen over the last few years has been the IT and tech in all its forms, really. And tech is likely to be reasonably resilient as we go through this. So we ought to be able to see growth fairly rapidly around tech. And part of that drives development and drives construction as well. But in terms of the visitor economy, is that after 3 months of lots of people being locked in their houses, people are going to I tell you, they're going to be desperate to go out. I'm going to the virtual pub every Friday night, but I'd love to go to a real one instead.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point as well. Just moving on to, again, what happens next, so to speak. And again, just prior to the lockdown, we had an announcement that Leeds have finally managed to get a devolution deal over the line. I think if this crisis has shown anything, it's that we've got good devolution deals in place. We've been able to respond a bit quicker than elsewhere in the country. But equally, I'm aware of the big numbers that are being spoken about in terms of national debt now, in terms of being able to prop up the economy. Now, we've been massive campaigners, you, I, many other people who are sat in this event today, for infrastructure spend in the Northern Powerhouse, HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail. Any conversations yet or any concerns from you that may be curtailed on the back of the spend that the government are committed to through this crisis?
Well, I think one thing we can be pretty certain of, that when we get to the autumn, and hopefully are certainly out of the worst of this anyway, is that public finances are going to be a bit of a mess, to be honest. But then have to look at what government will need to do to rebuild its finances. And frankly, if it simply just stops spending, what it will help to do is maintain what will be a downward spiral within the economy. That there, and I think this has got to happen globally as well. I don't think it can just be the UK. The world is going to have to spend to rebuild its economy, and investment in infrastructure is absolutely crucial to that. So I don't think those discussions are taking place, but I think anybody with an ounce of sense recognises, yet in some ways you cannot simply spend your way out of a recession. If you don't invest in the right things, you won't grow your way out of recession. And infrastructure is most definitely the right area to be spending in.
And maybe one of the lessons that has been learnt in recent weeks, Richard, is that actually, had we spent some more cash over the last 10 years, some of the challenges we're facing now would have been a little easier.
No, I think that's undoubtedly the case. And but again, it is going to be, there are going to be some very difficult decisions, both at a national and local level. If I look at the city council's financial position at the moment, we clearly are spending money we haven't got, because we're spending money, significant amounts of money over our budget in terms of things we are dealing with. Most of our sources of income have dried up one way or another, and that's likely to be the case for a couple of years. So you can look at, in microcosm at a local level, what's happened is likely to happen at a national level. We're not in a position to be able to borrow to sort out our revenue budget problems. The government can, and I think they're going to have to, if they really want to, make sure that we do get growth over the next 2-3 years.
And just turning to that devolution agenda for a second, Richard, as I say, Leeds have now finally got a deal. You, every time we speak, say, we want more, and actually we can evidence base the fact that the responsibilities that we've been given, we're beginning to see results, more success. What are the sort of conversations that you think need to be taking place now from Greater Manchester to government to say, right, let's get our next Devo-Manc deal in place, and let's have more devolved powers from Westminster? Because clearly, as I said earlier, if we'd have had those powers, responsibilities and resources, we may have been able to react even better to this crisis.
I think that's right. If you just take things like volunteering, for example, where there is a national volunteering system, it doesn't work anywhere near as well about what's being organised locally, not just in Manchester, but in other places as well. I think we can demonstrate even in this that yes, for a national crisis, you do need an element of command and control, but it's also got the flexibility to use the strengths that exist locally. It's going to be exactly the same when we come out of this. I think the biggest single thing, it's been the biggest single thing for a while, besides the investment in infrastructure, is got to be around education and skills, and about having an education and skills offer that is going to support the areas that we're going to be able to grow in.
And final question from me before I go to our panel of questioners who we've lined up prior. We obviously, one of the casualties of the last couple of months was MIPIM. Again, we've done an awful lot of work. Manchester has done a massive amount of work in terms of preparing for that. You've now, as a city, got to start to look at ways in which we can keep those investments coming in, hopefully find new ones as well. Any sort of plans for that yet, or is it too early to say? Not just MIPIM, but other work that we do in the international markets.
I think it is too early to say, although even as we speak, as a result of our relationships that we built over the years with China, we're all in very regular dialogue. a month ago it was about how we could support them. Now it's about how they can support us. But we've maintained some of our key international links as we go through this, and it is undoubtedly the case that for Manchester to continue to thrive, it has got to be around investment, both capital investment and direct investment in job creation, but also our ability to trade internationally as well. So in terms of recoveries, what will impact on that? Well, clearly getting the airport back running normally is got to be a big priority, because we know that particularly those long haul routes have really helped us drive investment and growth over the last few years, and those probably will be the routes that will come back first as well. So there are a few things we need to do there as part of being ready, but quite clearly we need to maintain our international links. We have to look as we come out of this about how we can enhance that, how we can build those relationships, and make sure that they are very rooted in how we create economic growth and jobs out of that. But bear in mind, this is a global pandemic. By definition, it wouldn't be a pandemic otherwise. And that means that all the places that we built relationships with have again the same interest in getting that back to the new normal as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Richard. Right, I'm going to ask Tom Higgins. Tom, are you with us? Chris, can you bring Tom into the conversation? Are we going to go to Lisa first?
No, I've got you now, Frank.
There he is. Right, Tom, good to virtually speak to you again, sir. What's your question for Richard?
Well, first of all, I thought, Frank, I was joining a seance when he kept saying, "Are you there?" But, thankfully, I'm not. So, Richard, I agree entirely that the key to recovery is through infrastructure. And the key challenge that I see for our sector is when we eventually come out of this period, we're going to have to do 2 or 3 things. One, we'll have to recommence certain projects, and we're going to have to pick up other projects. And the reason for that is we've had real mixed messages from the government as to how construction deals with this crisis. The latest direction we've had is that we carry on, provided we can actually comply with Public Health England's regulations in regard to social isolation or social spacing. So we're doing our best in that regard, but most projects have had to lose staff to do that because we can't carry on the way we were doing. So when we come out of this, it's going to take quite some time to get the projects up and running again to where they were. So that's a short to medium term issue. Looking forward, I suppose what we need is to make sure that when we come out of this period, in the medium to long term, that the pipeline is available for us to go at the future projects. And to that end, where are we with regard to planning regulations in the City Council? Because that's the start of the process for us. You know, if we're not getting planning applications through, then at some point in the medium term, there's going to be a gap with regard to projects that are available to the market.
Okay. Well, I agree with all of that. Can I just say for business and who should be operating and who shouldn't be operating, I think both myself and Andy Burden were, I think, fairly clear on this yesterday when the press conference, which is government has said that some businesses have to stop operating. They actually haven't defined other business at all. So basically, if you haven't been told to stop operating, there's no reason why you shouldn't now be operating, as long as you maximise, I know this is difficult for construction, but maximise the number of people who can work from home and are able to have good washing facilities, sanitisation facilities and social distancing within the workplace, and saying that basically any business that can do that ought to be able to continue operating. But it's clearly the best way of being able to build business in the future is to be able to keep as much of it as possible operating now. So it's not just essential businesses, although it's almost impossible to define an essential business anyway. For people who work in it, pretty much any business is essential. But yeah, we need to keep it going. In terms of the pipeline, I think there are two things, Tom. There are now a lot of projects which you all know, because you're involved in some of them, are paused as a result of where we are now. But basically planning is still operating. So we just saw, I think the other day, that the proposed new arena in East Manchester have just submitted their planning application, and it's being logged. And you'll see next week that there will be planning applications being considered in the arrangements we put in place, the emergency arrangements we put in place for planning applications to be considered. So it's not stopped, it's still going. And I'm fairly certain you will see some planning applications approved next week. Whether anybody's actually able to implement them for a few months is another thing entirely. But you are going to see the processes continue. And last week we had a quite bizarre council meeting. Bizarre because we basically kept it to a quorum only. So we told basically almost 3/4 of the members to stay away. But it was a council meeting. It was a full council meeting, a full agenda. I think it took 6 minutes, and that was to make sure that we have got arrangements in place to make sure that we can continue making decisions in key areas, including planning.
Excellent. That's good news.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Lisa Morton, are you with us still?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, hello. Hi, Sir Richard.
Hi, Lisa.
The group effort of the city in pulling together has been incredible. It's been exemplary, and we are always strong in adversity. So I certainly feel proud to be Mancunian at the moment, as always. But I just wondered, what have you seen over the past couple of weeks that has made you be proud to be Mancunian?
I think what I've seen, there's lots of things I've seen, and some of it's just the really simple stuff. Is that if I go around the corner to the bakery to buy the basics, I think bread is pretty basic, really. It is people queuing outside 2 meters apart. People are actually contributing to making sure they keep themselves safe and stay safe. We've had literally thousands of people volunteering, saying they want to volunteer to be able to support people in communities. We have had, through people having to take on new roles, a willingness to say, right, I want to help. What can I do? Rather than what you might have at other times, well, that's not my job. It's been the opposite of that, really, and a willingness of different organisations to talk. And again, if I get to a business thing, that businesses that clearly can't operate normally, and this includes, I think, your own business, Lisa, saying, how can we help? What can we do? What can we contribute?
Absolutely. Our business is most of it is in real estate and sport and leisure and hospitality. So we're kind of looking at options at the moment, but we're just going to try I'm on the board of the MPA, which is Manchester Publicity Association. And what agencies are finding is, because they've had to furlough people, there are actually skill gaps in their businesses, which is jeopardising the work that they can do with their existing clients. So we're going to try and pull the creative community together and have a really honest agreement between agencies that they can help each other fill those furlough gaps for this period of time, with a tacit agreement that it's based on complete honesty and transparency. And we're here just to try and keep the creative community together.
I think all of that, and I've seen some of the stuff that you've put out as a business, which I think is really positive. But there are lots of businesses saying to the council, saying to other public bodies, look, we've got people with skills that can help within this. We've got logistic planners, we've got a whole range of skills. We haven't got any work for them to do at the moment, but they could come and help you. So I think the business, and clearly there are businesses putting money in as well, because there are some businesses that are able to operate reasonably normally, but they are making cash contributions to be able to help as well. So a range of stuff, and it varies. It's different to what different businesses can do, but there has been, I think, a very positive business response to how can we help.
Yeah, wonderful.
And final question is going to come from Alan McNeil from Virgin. Alan? Alan's connection hasn't gone down, has it?
No, I can still see. His mic's just gone off now.
Right, okay.
No, it's
I'm back, am I?
yeah.
There you are, Alan. Hi.
Hi, Sir Richard. Good afternoon. Hi, Frank.
Hi.
Sir Richard, in talking with NHS England this afternoon, I was advised that you've taken political leadership for the health and social care.
Yeah, aren't I lucky?
Conversations. Congratulations, as if you didn't have enough to do.
Yeah.
So maybe my thoughts are, Virgin Media, first of all, we're fairly active, to say the least, at the present time in responding to our P1 NHS, CCG and emergency services customers. So there's a string of activities happening, but we're currently in discussion with NHS England around developing the Manchester Central Nightingale Hospital. So I'm just interested in perhaps some of your perspectives around health and social care in its widest sense, and your views on the driving towards the April 12th availability of the hospital facility at Central.
Yeah, okay. Can I say something else first, Alan? Because if you go back to the basics, there are an awful lot of people now, myself included, as now are now even more dependent on good digital connectivity just to be able to do my job. So just before this, I was talking to Sarah Price, who's the interim chief executive of Greater Manchester Health and Care. Steve Pleasant, who's the chief executive lead on health for Greater Manchester. That now has to be a digital conversation. That at the moment, for a lot of our GPs to be able to continue to function, there has been an acceleration in the extent to which they are being able to use online assessments rather than having physical assessments. Maintaining and strengthening our basic digital infrastructure has never been more important. And I say this, I'm not advertising for you, by the way, but I am a Virgin customer, so you better make sure you keep my line going. If you don't,
I'll take your postcode later if I may. Confidential.
Yeah.
I was interested.
But it is really important, and I think although I think people who are working from home on a permanent basis, it's like wanting to go out at night. People are desperate to get back into work at the moment because the social environment of work is actually part of what makes a lot of work function. But it's undoubtedly that some of the changes in working practice in health, for example, have been accelerated by the situation we're in. We need to make sure that we do maintain the infrastructure for that. In terms of what's happening with the hospital at Manchester Central, and clearly getting it up and running by April the 12th is no mean task. So that's basically getting a hospital up and running in a couple of weeks. Clearly, this has been done through military planners who are used to establishing field hospitals, not normally in this country, but they've got experience elsewhere in doing that. In terms of running the hospital, there is a full project team to set it up, led by Ian Williamson. There is a chief executive and senior management team in place, led by Michael McCourt. They are recruiting staff. They're putting in all the facilities that are required to have a hospital. And yeah, it is a challenge which you all know about because of your involvement in it. But it is at the moment on track, I believe, from everything I'm told anyway, to be up and running by April the 12th. It is a northwest facility, and that's going to create some problems that have to be resolved. So it's going to be when it discharges patients, a lot of whom will need to be discharged into situations where they get ongoing care in their community, whether it's primary health, social care, or whatever. So that involves liaison with Cheshire, with Merseyside, with Lancashire, Cumbria, to make sure all of those arrangements in place. So it's not just setting the hospital up. There is a range of stuff that goes on top of that as well. But I think where we're looking at the moment, although we do have at the moment spare capacity in hospitals across the region, the expectation that within the next 2 weeks that is going to be entirely swallowed by what are going to be largely a large increase in intensive care or certainly COVID-19 cases, and we are going to need that principally non-COVID-19 facility in order for all the other patients across the Northwest. So it is a challenge, but it does appear to be going pretty well at the moment. And again, for all of us that are going to be involved in that, there's going to be some real learning out of that as well, which we will be able to use in the future.
It's the first time I've seen a field hospital technology blueprint, Sir Richard. So you're absolutely right, a massive learning curve that we're going through. So yeah, thank you for that. Rest assured of our commitments. And I mean, if there's any further information that you would benefit from directly from Virgin Media, I would be happy to facilitate that, Frank, with your help and support. No,
thanks for that, Alan. Appreciate it.
That's great. And likewise, if there's anything I can do apart from checking up on your postcode competencies, then I'm here to help. That's basically the bottom line. It's good to speak with you.
Well, I'm in two minds about that anyway, Alan. That after a couple of weeks of video conferencing, frankly, I'm sick of video conferencing. If the whole system went down, I'd be quite happy, really.
I'll pick my moments, I guess. Take care.
Listen, I was going to close it up there, Richard, but if you've got 2 minutes, we've had a request from Alan Cross of the UK Space Agency to just ask a quick question. So Alan, fire your question away, please.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Richard. I just point out it's a European Space Agency, not UK Space Agency.
European.
Thank you. With the nudging behaviour that we're seeing, I think you just touched on it there about video conferencing and whatnot. And essentially the amount of social distancing and the steps we've taken to deal with this crisis. Can you comment on how that might have an effect on the climate crisis? Manchester City Council has got declared a climate emergency. And if we're willing to take such drastic steps to deal with this in the short term, should we be doing a fraction of this in the long term in order to help mitigate climate change?
No, that's a really interesting question, and not least because it's a long time since the air in the UK was as clean as is now, and that's largely clearly because we haven't got a lot of traffic on the road, and it has made a difference. I think there is another side to this, that one of the areas that we will be putting more resource into is into mental health. Because actually social distancing is already beginning to have a negative impact on lots and lots of people's mental health. And clearly, whilst we can demonstrate that we can do lots of things remotely, it's something I said earlier, social interaction is really, really important. And it's important in a lot of workplaces as well. So I think we'll find coming out of this is that the willingness of people to work flexibly will increase. So, the sort of thing of in the office 3 days, not in 2 days, I think is likely to increase. But actually, for our health, we need to get back to something that approaches more like normality. And in all of this is that we need to be wary about what we ultimately need to do in order to be able to achieve a zero carbon environment. And that is, it is clean power, not just redistributing where the power is, because not least because using IT and using a lot more IT consumes vast amounts of power. Your laptop and everything is not carbon neutral. We need carbon neutral, zero carbon electricity in order to really get where we want to be around emissions. So, the air is cleaner, but we're still using a lot of power, and a lot of that is carbon generated power.
Okay. Thanks for that, Alan. And Richard, thanks very much for handling a complex and diverse range of questions this afternoon. Always good to speak to you, mate. And clearly you're going to be extremely busy over the next few months.
Certainly are. But look, there is always something that's really important about this, and business plays its part. That we know that when times are tough, they really are the times that we need to pull together. And I think at the moment, Manchester, hardly surprisingly, is pulling together. We just need to keep that going and recognise that, unlike a lot of the crises we faced in the past, this is not a 1 or 2 day crisis. This is going to be a few months. That means it's hard work. And those of us, all of us that are in leadership positions, whether it's business or whether it's politics, have to really show that leadership of behaving in the right way and making sure we do pull together.
Excellent. Thanks very much. A very positive message to end on. And Richard, you were the first guest in the downtown Den for a live event, so I appreciate that.
It's all right. Pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Thanks very much. And listen, gang, as I said earlier, we will circulate everybody's details. If you want any introductions, let me know. If there's anything that you can help Manchester City Council with, feed that through to us, and we'll put it into the right hands. And the other thing I should say, I know Lisa's still online. If you've got a spare hour or so and you're wondering what you can do with it, you could do a lot worse than listen to the We Built This City podcasts that RDPR have put together, which I've only listened to one so far, absolutely superb. So thanks for that, Lisa. Thanks for the entertainment. And we'll see you all again very soon.